Welcome back, or welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast by AMPLOS. I am Cory, Shaffer, joined today by Dr. Milt Lowder. Milt, what's up, man?
Yeah, good to see you. Good to be on the podcast. I feel like we're getting a little bit of a rhythm and a cadence going here, so always enjoy our time together and conversation. Looking forward to today's topic.
Yeah, so today's topic was really just something that I've put some thought into recently. Comes up, I feel like regularly in the work that we do. I feel like we're constantly helping people navigate change. And that may be change in their personal lives, change from like an organizational standpoint or a team standpoint. And so this is a topic I think you and I are pretty familiar with and comfortable talking about with others, but I don't know if we've ever really tried to do a deeper dive and a podcast on it. So I've done some research here and have had some recent conversations about it. So wanted to just unpack change a little bit, talk about why it's, number one, how pervasive it is, how sort of prevalent it is in all of our lives. And so not necessarily something that we should be fearful of because it's coming, right? How do we have the right mindset about it? Look at it just from a lot of different angles. And then in terms of communicating change, more so, I think, from like if you're a leader in business or a coach or something like that, how can you communicate change effectively so that your people or whoever's going to be impacted by the change can respond to it best? So that's sort of a very broad general roadmap here to get us started. Give me your take just quickly. I feel like, again, this is something that's come up for me. You've been doing this longer than I have.
Yeah, I probably have more of those disruptions in my life than you at this point, but I think it is something that we just take for granted. And we know intuitively that change is going to happen, but it's something we tend to fear or avoid. It's something we can't control in our minds. And so we try to control and try to hold on to who we are. And sometimes we know how our brains are wired and how our bodies were created. It just kind of wants us to keep doing what we've always done. And how I like how you frame this is really let's define what change is. And change happens in one or two ways. The intentional, deliberate, narrowing the gap between awareness of who I am and who I want to be. That's change that we try to promote from a proactive perspective. What you're really talking about here that I think is so prevalent and pervasive in our life, the change that just happens on a consistent basis through life events. And what can we do about that? And what's a way to respond to that? And how can we use that to really grow? And how can we be resilient in the face of change?
Yeah, well said. So we'll start. I always start this is just how my brain works. You're familiar with that after all these years together, but just a definition. All right. So using change as a verb, at least, is to make someone or something different. Synonyms: modify, alter, transform. I started doing a little bit of digging here, and the first sort of reference point I used a recent book the last couple of years by a guy named Brad Stulberg. Wrote a book called Master of Change. It's about this topic. Takes a much deeper dive than we will today. But what I really liked is he introduces this concept known as disorder events. So these are things that happen in our lives that fundamentally shift our experience of ourselves and the world that we live in. That may be for the better, that may be for the worse. And so...
Yeah, that's the part that I hear about even just the definition of change. It's like, hey, making something different.
Correct.
When we think about growth, we're thinking about, hey, better.
Right.
How can you be better? How can you pursue better? Change it just alters it.
Right. And it may be good, maybe bad. Some of that even is probably up to interpretation or perception of the individual.
Yes.
And again, we'll talk more about that. But I even like the differentiation here sort of at a macro level or more societal level, let's say. We're talking about big, massive things that alter a large group of people, things that alter an entire country, a civilization, that type of stuff. So
COVID would be a good example.
COVID is a great example of that. Things like war, technological changes. Think about how that has changed the human experience. The internet now coming, AI.
Yes.
These are things that not everybody, I shouldn't say that, but large masses of people are impacted by. You think about social, political unrest, economic recessions, like anything that fits in that category, really big picture kind of stuff that impacts us. You can sort of narrow that down to a more micro level, more individualized level. This might be starting or leaving a job, marriage or divorce, having children, losing a loved one,
Yes.
A promotion, retirement, like any of these.
Kids leaving home.
Sure.
Just
Going to
having
college.
move, going to college,
Getting your first job.
Exactly. All these things are these disruption or disorders. I call them disruptions,
Yeah.
disordered events in our life that force change.
Absolutely. And so what was really interesting, again, to put some language to that, I thought it was helpful. But then what research is showing is that on average, people experience 36 of these disorder events during their adulthood. Now, I didn't look into how are they defining adulthood, but let's just say that's starting at the age of 18.
Yes.
Right? So probably some of those early ones, again, maybe graduating high school, going off to college and so on. But if you average that out, and I'm assuming they're using just the average, lifespan, about one of these disorder events is occurring every 18 months. Again, that's just on average, right? Sometimes it feels like they're coming much more rapidly than that. Other times you may go without really feeling it. So the point here is, change is not the exception. It's the norm.
Yes.
It's something that we all experience at a pretty regular clip throughout our lives.
But it's something we tend to fear so much. And we're talking about the kind of change, not the intentional disruption, disorder that we are creating. We're talking about events that happen to us.
Yeah.
With those events, you're saying one every 18 months is kind of the norm, and sometimes it feels like it's much more common than that. Mm-hmm. And we are reacting so much to the change. We aren't growing. We aren't aware of it. We aren't mindful of it. And that prevents us from really growing from it.
Yeah.
And so what are some of those common responses that we see to these disordered events in our life?
Yeah, so we'll go through just a few here and provide some examples. I think one, maybe some very low-hanging fruit, and this probably aligns best to what you were saying about sort of fearing it, is just attempting to avoid it, or refusing to acknowledge that the change is coming or it's happened. Yeah. So an example of this might be a company, let's say, that refuses to shift to more digital business and is doing things at this point that probably seem very archaic, right, to sort of 2025 business practices. That might be one very simple example. So avoiding change or refusing to acknowledge change.
Yeah, and even with that, I think avoiding it or this sense of denial or ignorance, I look at back some of the disruptions in my life, the traumatic events that happened from junior year of high school through sophomore year of college. And at the time, I didn't even call them traumatic events. I don't really even understand what that was. I wasn't calling them disorders. It just was kind of like life. And so it was this big picture piece, and I wasn't even sure what was happening or experiencing. We weren't really talking about it back then. Only now can I see how much that changed my life and how much I've grown from it. But not even being aware of it, mm-hmm. and understanding my reaction to it, the anger, the frustration, the hurt, the pain, the stress, I didn't have words for it.
Yeah.
And so I tried to avoid thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the other things that you tend to see is just the active resistance to change. The example here is a great one.
Did you pick this one out for me and Caroline?
No, not at all. But, so our example, an older parent who still wants to tell his or her college-age kids what to eat, what to wear, sort of refusing to acknowledge of like, hey, they've grown up, they can make these decisions on their own and so on.
Yeah, that one hits home a little bit. If you're around the dinner table at the Lowder household, you will. Our kids are getting a lot of suggestions, and it is like part of that piece is. Just this one in this example that you're using, you do see that they're growing up, they're always your kids. And so your brain has a hard time altering the perception of they're still my kids, they still need me.
Yeah.
And understanding and appreciating, here's the event that's taking place. They have to grow up on their own. They have to make their own decisions. I just still feel and act probably subconsciously. Mm-hmm. Of telling them what to do. Yeah. Thank you, Cory. I appreciate that.
All right, we'll move on to the next one. So sacrificing agency amidst chaos. And so give an example here that'll help explain what that means. Let's just say receiving a scary health diagnosis and then basically you kind of just let yourself go.
Yeah.
You stop paying attention to diet. Maybe you stop exercising. This might be, I feel like you see this in movies and TV shows. Let's say somebody loses their job and then they just sort of completely throw in the towel and let themselves go, and they just sit on the couch and they do nothing. So agency meaning, your freedom to choose how you go about things, right?
Yeah.
And so despite the fact that there's some chaos and there's been maybe a challenging or traumatic event, essentially throwing in the towel and just going almost like, well, what does it matter?
Yeah, exactly. You just give up. And so that extreme, you can hear, my cognitive bias comes in, the extreme words like, this doesn't matter. It like, I'm always going to be like this. And so we let that change dictate everything about our life, and it makes us helpless and hopeless.
Right. And the last one here that we'll hit on, and this is actually one that I see a ton in the sports world, is trying to get back to where we were. So again, disorder event happens, large change. This is really common. The reason I mention athletes is related to injury. Really, really common. I think athletes in a lot of ways feel sort of invincible. And then an injury that sets them back 9 months, a year or more, completely sort of turns their world upside down. And you hear all the time, and it's so frustrating to hear athletes talk about like, oh, I'll just get back to where I was.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not the case. You're never going to be there.
Yes. Maybe better. You never know, but you aren't going to be who you are. And we try, that's a great example. Great example.
And years ago, we had a guy on the podcast, Casey Weathers, if you want to go back and listen to that. But he talks about sort of living this, in pro baseball, and sort of chasing a ghost of who he used to be, and how that never really allowed him to fully accept who he was at that time. So again, that's a very common one that I've come across. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. I think these, again, are just some of the common responses that you may see, and maybe some of those resonate and hit, our listeners. Yeah, so let's shift. And I wanted to just, again, continue to just add some layers to the concept of change. A couple different models. Milt, you and I were talking here before we even started. Homeostasis, if you're familiar with that word, it's because you learned it in like high school biology or in anatomy class or something, because that's essentially how the human body is wired. That's how we've understood the human body for years. So homeostasis, what that means is healthy systems, the drive is to return to stability, right, of where they started after some sort of disruption or disorder event.
And that's how our bodies were created and our brains were created. Like, we want to go back to your example of the athlete. We want to kind of get back to baseline, to what I know, because this feels comfortable to me, and this illusion of control. Like, if I can just get back to here, then I'm in control, and this feels familiar, and this feels comfortable, and this is where my body wants to be. This is where my brain wants to be. This is how I try to structure my life. And so we're constantly fighting our biology of trying to return us back to that normal state. And we think about the automaticity of the brain. When I think in layman's terms, the brain is just very lazy and very efficient, and just creates those patterns and pathways, and just wants to throw us into like, this is kind of what we know.
Right. Even, again, the human body, like if you think about when there's order, body temperature is 98.6 degrees. Let's say you get an infection or something, your temperature spikes, right? It goes up to whatever, 100 degrees. Body's working to basically repair, recover. But what ends up happening, you come back to 98.6 degrees. So it's sort of like going from X, disorder event Y, but we return back to X.
Yeah, and that's just what we want to do as human beings. We want to go back. I mean, I can hear so many people my age now, Cory, going, I just like, hey, back to how it was.
Yeah.
This is how I used to be, and this is how life used to be, and life was easier, and life was this, and so we want to go back and hold on.
I think in some ways, again, it's still, it's crazy now, COVID 5 years ago, but still, I think some people are like, man, pre-COVID, right? Like, I'd love to go back to then. It's like, well, that's not happening. Okay. So that's actually less helpful, I think, in terms of a way to think about change. That's unfortunately how we tend to view it.
Yes.
But may not be the most adaptive or helpful.
Yeah. So say why that is. Break that down, because I'm 100% it is not very helpful.
Yeah. So the sort of counter model here is, instead of homeostasis, it's called allostasis. So again, homeostasis, order followed by disorder. The goal is to return to order. Allostasis is order followed by disorder, but then reorder. So the healthy system returns to stability, but in sort of a new place. Yeah. So again, I used earlier the example of homeostasis from X to Y to X. This is X to Y to Z, sort of a new starting point.
Yeah, I like that. That's the Ivy League. I like that X and Y to Z. And so to me, I can't go back. If you've heard us talk about our response to these disruptions, and we talk about that paradigm, there's an event that is a disruption. You get to have the human reaction, and instead of kind of going back to where we were, the XYX, the response is now to the disorder, to the disruption. That leads me to Z, which is growth. Mm-hmm. And so in terms that you've maybe heard us talk about before, event, reaction, response, growth, that's the model. That's the healthy response to life, because these are coming at us once every 18 months.
Yeah.
And if I just try to go back to normal, how sad it is that I haven't used these opportunities to grow and change for the better.
Yep. No, and again, that's why I think just reading about that, bringing some new language to it for me was really helpful.
Yes.
That's the model we should be striving for, not homeostasis, at least not in this case and what we're talking about.
And so
human body can be great with homeostasis, but I think when it comes to this type of change that we're discussing, allostasis is much more adaptive.
We can kind of take it a deeper level here, back to the homeostasis of, go back to the parenting example. Like we try to keep our kids and hide our kids from the disruptions, from the disorders that are going to happen. We try to prevent them and shield them, which robs them of a chance to learn how to embrace change at early age.
Yeah.
And we know inherently children are pretty resilient, but we tried to, I had a great little experience this morning, made me think about a response to a disruption. I was walking Millie out this morning, and I saw this young family walking out, and the girl can't be 3 years old. And I just said, "Hey, good morning." And she said, "My dog's gone to heaven." And so her dog had died. I don't know when that was, but she was so glad to tell me that her dog had gone to heaven. Like, she hadn't gone back to normal with her dog. Like, children just have a way of putting into words and understanding. And as parents, we try to prevent that.
Yeah.
And like, hey, let's go get a new dog. Let's go get a new this. And she had a very healthy response to this disruption. But sometimes how we parent, we just want that homeostasis. We just want things to be easy for our children, and we take away the very thing from them that can really facilitate their growth.
Yeah, I think that's well said. As I was just, again, sort of in this rabbit hole and thinking about change, I went back to some basics in psychology. So I don't know how much we've ever talked about self-determination theory on the podcast. It's pretty simple, but a very robust theory, a lot of research to back it and support it. Essentially, motivation, well-being, development, even performance are positively influenced when three basic psychological needs are met, okay? And those needs are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And so if you think about competence, what that means is feeling capable and effective in one's actions and interactions with the environment. So imagine, an organizational change coming, something like, hey, we're going to use a new CRM tool.
Yeah.
And I've worked for this company for 10 years, and I've used the same CRM tool. Immediately, you see how competence is threatened, because I go from an expert in this very thing, because I spend hours and hours a day in this CRM tool, to literally overnight, you're asking me to be a complete novice. And it's like I'm looking at a different language now with this new system.
And so it not only affects my competence, but my confidence in executing it.
Right.
And so that anxiety, that fear, I do what? I avoid the change.
Yep.
Or I talk about it and I downplay it and I resist it. Go back to those reasons we resist change, because it just feels uncomfortable. And that's where our feelings can really betray us.
Autonomy, you can imagine how, especially if a disorder event is happening sort of to me, immediately I feel threatened, because it's like, well, I don't have a choice whether or not, I sort of get to opt in or out of the COVID experience. That's gone. My choice here is gone. Now it's from there, I choose how to react to it. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, these changes that are happening, as you mentioned from the start, they're out of our control.
Yes.
So the very nature of it is challenging to our autonomy, to our agency.
I mean, you can take that down a political pathway right now in our country. and how both sides are looking at this lack of autonomy, this lack of independence, this lack of freedom control, and you can see the chaos that's erupting and ensuing from it.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one, relatedness. This one is interesting because some change, it's certainly intact. Others, it's not. You can almost think about that more micro, macro. Let's say macro level of a event. Hey, my entire department just got closed within my organization. Well, relatedness to a degree is still intact because I can look around and go, hey, there are some other people in the same boat as me, right? Like I do feel connected to some people through this change. Or if it's happening like, hey, you are fired. Now I'm looking around and I feel like I'm on an island because this is happening to me, not necessarily to others. And so
that's really Yalom, who kind of the father of group therapy. His whole belief was the universality of experience, that if we're going through something together, we have a much better chance of embracing the change, of growing through that experience, versus if I'm going through something by myself. We see a lot of time with our athletes that they lose a family member and they're 1,000 miles from home and they're the only one that's experiencing that disruption, that disorder. And so that anxiety, that stress, they don't feel connected. You see an injury to an athlete and they're separated from the team. That sense, and Cory, I think a little bit in the world today, the paradox we find ourselves in with all the technology, we're more quote unquote connected than ever before, but we don't have that sense of relatedness and belonging. We're more isolated than ever before.
So again, the point here, when I started thinking about just a simple theory in psychology, I'm like, man, it's no wonder that we struggle so much with change, because they threaten our most basic psychological needs. Which is really, really fascinating to think about and kind of piece together.
So look at the language that may follow that. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't handle this change. I can't handle that new CRM. I'm not in control. Everything's happening to me. There's nothing I can do that's really going to help. And then I'm all by myself.
Not a great place to be. And so again, it explains why those responses to change are what they are oftentimes. So let's pivot and look at this again, just from another angle here. And I don't know if it's necessary to do a deep dive into some growth mindset stuff, but that does apply here. At least to get us going there, Milt, talk to us about, I know something that you teach and teach very well, the life cycle.
I think this has just become so paramount in our lives. And we know the life cycle. That was really, I think I learned in Marketing 101, the life cycle of a business or a product, where you have these distinct stages of introduction. There's the birth of a company, the birth of an organization, the birth of a product, this rapid growth. And at some point, that product, that company, that organization, that team is going to hit their peak. And then we know there's a slow, steady decline towards death and irrelevancy. I mean, that's the pattern of a life cycle of a business, a product, a team, an organization. And unfortunately, Cory, that's the pattern of our life. And it can be very demoralizing and very discouraging. And what we talk about is when we are on top, like go to the All Blacks, we're on top of our game, we've got to change our game. How can we create a new curve? How can we be innovative from a position of strength? Because if not, we are going to go back to homeostasis. I'm just going to try to hold on. That I'm not growing, I'm not getting better, I'm not changing, I'm not adapting, I'm not resilient, and I become very discouraged and very depressed.
And I think, it just highlights the necessity for change, right? If we're going to continue to just thrive, I think as human beings, it's sort of a requirement. It's not something necessarily, again, that you have the luxury of sort of opting in or out for. It's just going to be necessary, or else you literally will feel sort of passed by. You kind of sparked a thought in my mind of kind of here's what we see happen really in America. This American dream of, hey, when I get financial security, hey, when my children graduate, hey, when I'm able to retire. Well, I read an article this morning, what is a contributing factor to dementia and Alzheimer's is retirement. Because I quit learning, I quit growing, my brain becomes stagnant. There's no change, there's no growth. And you see that steady decline. And I see so many men, especially right now, in that kind of 45 to 65 range where they've quote unquote made it in the world and they're miserable because they thought it was going to feel different.
And we were created as human beings to keep pursuing, to keep evolving, to keep changing, to keep embracing that. And we think we're going to get to a certain level and stop and feel this level of contentment, and people become lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, well said. Again, I think ultimately that's what it does, is it's highlighting this is a necessity. And the connection here to fixing growth mindset is simple, right? Like growth mindset principles in terms of change is to embrace it. Embrace it with a sense of resilience and openness. I think what you probably see in some of these individuals you're describing is a little bit of a fixed mindset.
No doubt, 100%.
Right, towards especially like that particular stage of life is almost like, well, I worked my butt off to get to this point. I shouldn't need to keep learning or developing or
keep growing. Yeah.
Right. Like I want to just kick my feet up. And so there's a stubbornness, there's a digging in their heels toward that stage, because it's almost a feeling of entitlement toward, I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah. And what that expectation does lead to that and we see it organizations, teams, and individuals, that when I think I've arrived, I compromise the very thing that has got me to that point. Mm-hmm. The work ethic, the effort, the embracing change, the resilience, I compromise that because I think I shouldn't have to work that hard anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, again, we've used a visual for a long time, very basic, sort of 3 concentric circles, one in the middle being that comfort zone. And that's what we're describing, right? Like people who are resistant to change, is they want to draw back into just what feels comfortable. That's the homeostasis that we described. Instead of just stepping outside of what feels comfortable, and sure, it can be uncomfortable to adapt to certain changes, but that's where the growth, the transformation is taking place. And as long as we can stay in sort of the appropriate space and not go so far outside of that to where, you're trying to teach, I guess, like calculus to a 5-year-old, right? Yeah. And to be honest, this is where I'll share a little bit. My parents are ones who are in the stage that you've talked about, or maybe even beyond that stage, but going back a handful of years, we're so resistant to technology. And it's not that, we've had the internet, to be clear, since I was a kid. But sort of doing things on their own. And my wife and I got them an iPad years ago so that we could like FaceTime them, and so that they could see their grandkids and all this kind of stuff. And early on, I think they went 6 months, and I bet you they never turned it on. Like I helped them set it up on Christmas Day, and I'm like, hey, have you used the iPad? I'm like, no. They're like, we can't figure it out.
Wow.
And
go back to your autonomy example.
Exactly.
And your confidence.
It just felt like, and what I finally understood thinking about these circles is like, they felt it was so far beyond what was comfortable and what their current skill set was with technology that they were completely crippled by it. And it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was so like demoralizing even, because it's like they couldn't even figure out how to turn it on.
Look at the language. Like, I can't do this.
Right.
I can't handle this.
Right.
So, I can't figure this out.
So what I had to kind of do was almost treat it a little bit more like, hey, let me scaffold you here, just like you would with a child learning a skill, and sort of just walk you through baby steps, and then point you to, like on the iPad, I'm like, hey, I bet somewhere on there, if you swipe left or right, there's like a tips app. They're like, oh yeah, I found it. I'm like,
awesome.
Mom, here's what I want you to do. Every day, open up that tips app and just go through a couple of tips. Like you're not going to get comfortable with it until it's in your hands and you start just playing with it. Like I promise you, you're not going to hurt anything. You're not going to break the internet. Like just get on there and start playing with it. So anyways, just to kind of connect the dots there.
It's a great example.
Like I've seen that in real life. So the last piece here from Stolberg, and then we'll shift to, in terms of communicating change, how you can do that well. He presents this model of rugged flexibility, which I really liked, because to be rugged means to be tough, determined, and durable. To be flexible means to be adaptable, to sort of bend without breaking. And so combining that, he describes this as a gritty endurance to not only withstand change, but thrive in the midst of it. And I thought that the language around that is really, really good. It fits with, again, the literature related to growth mindset, some of the things that we just talked about.
And it's language that we don't use. Go back to even your example with your parents, like, I'm not good at technology.
Right.
And we set so many limits on ourselves and so many limits to grow by how we think about ourselves.
Well, yeah, and that's some of the piece that I think, even again, to stick with my example, that has been frustrating for my siblings and I, and we've had conversations about, and you've met my parents, but it's like, man, my dad was always such a badass.
Yeah.
Like, he was tough.
Yeah.
So to see him be so weak and not tough, just about like, man, it's an 8x6 screen.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Has been really, really fascinating. So that idea of rugged is like, yeah, we want that toughness. We want the determined nature that you've always had, but just the willingness to be flexible now with it.
But what these disruptions do, Cory, is they take us away from who we are. We lose our identity. Bruce is forgetting that he's tough, that he's rugged, that he's gritty, because he's faced with something he's never faced.
Right.
And in these disruptions that come at us in life, we talk all the time, it's so hard to prepare for what you can't predict. And that stress overwhelms you, and that stress separates you from who you are, separates you from others. You become so overwhelmed, you forget who you are. Mm-hmm. The fixed mindset is such a great example, because the number one characteristic of growth mindset, you believe your effort will eventually get you to the outcome.
Yep.
Well, that fixed mindset, you just believe, like, no matter what I do, I can't do it.
Right.
And you avoid those things. You avoid the challenges.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Last thing here, and we'll probably have to hit this relatively quickly, but just going through a couple of bullets. In terms of how to communicate change, this is probably most relevant. It can apply to anybody, but especially, let's say, if you're leading a business or something along those lines, just a couple of reminders for how to do this well. Some of this is very low-hanging fruit and should just be reminders, but we're going to go through them anyway. So first one here, share the vision for the change. So why is it necessary, and what are the benefits going to be?
Yeah, I just always go back to the quote from Nietzsche, he who has a why can suffer almost anyhow, right? If the why is communicated correctly, then we don't suffer the how. We get excited about the how. Mm-hmm. If we can share that vision, if we can share that, here's why we're doing this, here's kind of why we're going to embrace, then everybody gets on board of how it's going to happen. But if not, we become so overwhelmed with what the change is or what the disruption is, we aren't able to function or process or move through it.
Yeah. What's the next one, Milt?
Yeah, just be open and transparent. I don't think you can promise what you can't deliver. And too many times, since we don't have the answers, especially as leaders, especially as parents, especially as coaches, we don't know what the answer is. And instead of being open and transparent about your own humanity, your own vulnerability, your own anxiety, we avoid that. Mm-hmm. And that lack of communication creates more doubt, more hesitation, more frustration.
Exactly. So I think just helping people fill in the gaps, like, here's what we do know, here's what you can expect, here's what we don't know, and that we're going to sort of be learning and figuring out together. Yeah, I think that goes a long way.
And it goes back to your sense of belonging. Like, if you're willing to be vulnerable with that and willing to be open and transparent, then it brings us on the same page.
Yeah.
It that vulnerability and transparency helps build and create the oxytocin on bonding there. Okay, what else we got?
Be supportive and empathetic. Again, that sounds very simple and very basic, but it's just a recognition to meet people where they're at.
Yes.
You're going to have varying degrees of buy-in or excitement or enthusiasm around change. Some people, and we know this, personality types, we didn't really talk about that, but just certain personality types and just some wiring, how people are naturally going to respond to change and pace and all that kind of stuff.
Cory, I think this is so important, because I think, especially if you've lived life long enough, and I know I talk about shame and guilt not being great motivators, but I can do this to my children when they were young, and they would have something bad happen to them in their life, and I would say, man, I hope this is the worst thing that ever happens to you. And I realize now what I was doing is I was minimizing their change. I was minimizing their experience. I was minimizing that disruption in my life, because at my age, it wasn't that big of a deal. So sometimes that happens to us as leaders. We minimize other people's experience because we know that change isn't that big, but it's big to them.
Yeah. No, well said. Again, and that's like, just meet them where they're at. Recognize that some people are probably not going to be very excited about it. They're going to go through all these different stages and experiences that we've talked about. So what's next?
Yeah, I think just the constant communication, right? Giving people a chance to be heard, to not minimize their experience, to constantly give feedback. Without that, our minds tend to race and tend to go worst case scenario. So that constant communication and contact and giving people a chance, not only see and hear what they're saying, but hey, I got you. We're on the same team.
Yeah, and you're also promoting psychological safety by doing that. The last one here that we'll hit is just to celebrate progress. So once the change is sort of enacted or you kind of head down that pathway, that's just important for motivation purposes, for engagement, right? To reinforce progress and the effort that you're seeing, to adopting the change and so on. Because again, especially if you've communicated it well, like we shouldn't expect overnight, this is just going to be different or better immediately. It's going to take time. But when you do see progress, then I think as best you can, try to celebrate that and reinforce it.
And progress is the right word. It's not that we've mastered the change. It's not that we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish. But go back to what my old supervisor, when God closes one door, he opens another, but it's hell in the hallway. Progress is we're still walking.
Yeah.
And we're better than we used to be. That to me is we have to be able to recognize that and celebrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we covered a lot of ground today.
Yes, more than I thought we would get to.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground here related to change. Again, I'm sure there's hours and hours we can continue to talk about this topic, but what do you want to leave our listeners to think about?
Yeah, what we hope you always do is say, hey, what did this really mean? What's it mean to you? What are you going to do with it? One thing that I think would be a necessary and healthy reflection is look back on some of the changes, disruptions, disorders that have happened in your life, and how have you responded? And how have you grown? How has it made you who you are? And what's your mindset toward change in the future? And where can you create the disruption? Some of you are in some significant disruption right now in your life. How can you embrace that? How can you grow from that? What's the mindset you have around that? So this is a really great podcast for you to kind of stop and reflect and think and separate who you are from what you do a little bit and recognize the own progress and growth in your life. How about you?
No, I think you said it well. I think if this adds some perspective, if you feel seen or heard now and sort of bringing some new language to your own experiences and understanding a little bit more about why you've responded at different times to changes in your life, then I think that's a huge win for us. If this opens you up to hopefully be a little more open to change in the future, then again, that's a huge win. So thanks to our listeners for tuning in. If you guys have questions, want to interact with us at all, by all means, hit us up on social media. Like us, rate us, review us, send the pod to a friend. And we will see you next time on The Growth Project.